Hi, everybody. I want to talk about what I think are the five maddest and most harmful things we're doing in society right now. I mean, we're doing a lot of things wrong, of course, but and I think all of which are underpinned by a lack of passion or even a lack of regard for truth seeking. But I've picked these five because of the damage I think that's likely to escalate and proliferate if they're allowed to continue as they are, but also because these are the damaging things that will go on to do unseen damage and further damage in other areas, like a virus that keeps infecting more and more people. Um, and I think these things are a combination of damage that's already been done and will get worse. And so the five things are the banks and politicians flooding the economy with more money supply, combined with the increasing size of the state and the bloated state expenditure. Um, the second one is attacks on free speech. The third is climate change alarmism. The fourth is what I've called infantilizing our youth. And the fifth is the biological sex and gender issue, all of which are complex, but I'm just going to run through them with you and give you some thoughts on them in no particular order. So let's start with the climate change. Um, I think it's no exaggeration to say that people peddling the delusion of alarmist climate propaganda are complicit in, I think I've called it before, a proxy murderous ideology. If you support any of the extreme green policies that make energy artificially more expensive for the poorest people in the world, waste capital and resources on projects with severe and unjustified opportunity costs, or impede people's ability to learn, to earn a living, feed their family, and enjoy their own kind of economic growth that we've had. And virtually every climate policy ticks those boxes. Then I think you have blood on your hands. Maybe not directly, and in some cases perhaps directly, but largely indirectly. And this, you are helping to contribute to the suffering and death of hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions over time, while you in this country live in relative luxury as one of the top richest people who've ever lived, if you take all the people who've ever lived on this planet. And that sounds extreme, but when you think about it, it really isn't. Whether you're knee deep in this scam or just a gentle old lady who votes for the Green Party to do your little bit for the environment, you're contributing to the perpetuation of the biggest economic and political scam that has ever been wrought on humanity, certainly in recent times. Just because the devastation of this scam is so thinly spread, it doesn't mean that you're not complicit in it if you're supporting this stuff. In a sense, you're a bit like a millionaire eating at a banquet table while putting your foot on the hand of the pauper underneath the table, trying to grab a piece of bread that's fallen from your dinner plate. I really am not trying to be sensationalist or mischievously provocative here. I've researched and I've contemplated this stuff for a lot of years, and I've been in many debates on these matters. I've met a lot of people on both sides, and I've not found a single reason to depart from the view that this is going to turn into the most damaging mass delusion and hysteria that modern humans have ever constructed. You can read my blogs on this stuff. There's loads of them, and we're not saying there's no climate problem to deal with. We're not saying that at all, but we're saying that this is not the right way to go about it by a long stretch. I mean, the last time I checked, despite the fact that Britain's responsible for about 1% of global emissions, I think it was, those net zero targets are just astoundingly short-sighted. You don't understand the driving force of the human progression of material living standards and lifting ourselves out of poverty. That's largely been the access of affordable energy, most of it fossil fuels up to this stage. And we want to wean ourselves off, but this is entirely the wrong way of going about it. We are talking about spending, I think it's 1 or 2% of GDP per year on climate change for the next 30 years, adjusted for increasing GDP total size over the years, and including, I think it's about 15 billion a year that we already spend on subsidies to renewable energy. That distorts the true cost. This is going to cost the taxpayer around £1 trillion last time I did the calculations. To put that into perspective, I think I said it's like spending £91 million every day for the next 30 years. You would be hard-pressed to find a more disastrous and controversial idea than one that commits to that kind of spending. Causes so much suffering and harm to the poorest people in the world, making their energy more expensive, making our energy more expensive. And yet it's blithely supported by the majority of the country, despite them never having laid eyes on a single paper or argument that even attempts to recognize the notion of a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis, never having even a flicker of acknowledgement of the complex trade-offs, the benefits of capitalism and fossil fuels, nor any attempt to justify any of their policies by explaining why the benefits of the climate agenda outweigh the benefits of the alternatives. You don't see any of that, and that should make you really suspicious. It's a whole new level of political corruption and short-sightedness, and I've never once met anybody that can engage with this subject at the level required who's on the side of climate alarmism. And as well as the effects that come from the government and the politicians and the media, young people have been brought up in this world as this sort of stuff being normalized, genuinely scared of an impending apocalyptic event, becoming hysterical with anxiety, wondering whether it's even safe to have children in some cases. You've got lunatics taking to the street and stopping traffic and destroying sports events, and these people are absolutely insane, and they're a product of what's happened at the higher level by the media and the politicians. It's an absolute catastrophe. There are problems to solve. We will solve them, but not in this way. It's absolutely absurd. My number 2 is the systematic attacks on free speech in this country. It's an absolute catastrophe. It's again, it's only at the thin end of the wedge stage. It's going to get a lot worse. But I've said before, I see the benefits of free speech as being rather like the benefits of the free market. There are very obvious parallels between the benefits of the freedom to innovate with goods and services and trade and the benefits of the freedom to innovate with words and ideas. You look at the success of capitalism in the last 150 years and the progression explosion that has benefited our species, and you can say similar things about the expression of free thought, ideas, trading off, knowledge, wisdom. It's both capitalism and free speech. They are the essential vehicles for the enhanced well-being of liberty and the progression of our species. With capitalism, it's higher living standards and material progress, and with free speech, it's greater knowledge and a more comprehensive understanding of truths. you can even see that there are obvious parallels between the two in terms of how, when they're regulated well, that they serve for the benefit of the when they're regulated lightly and well, they serve for the benefit of the system in question, and just as market innovation through competition, it challenges the quality and the efficiency and the value of these goods and services. It's rather like through a mechanism that mirrors natural selection, and it makes improvements for the consumer. Free expression of thoughts and ideas. They challenge prior views. They help us enhance our current views and learn from new information. They help us isolate cognitive errors, and they just generally make improvements in our intellectual and our empirical and our epistemological pursuits. And because of which everybody loses out when free speech is retarded in this way. It's not just that attempted safe spaces stifle thought and erode free expression. The people within the walls of their self-constructed safe spaces, they're never really protected from what lurks beneath the subducts of their psyche, and their despair at being incarcerated in such a constricting mental prison. You're never ever safe from the dangers of retarding truth, however safe you think it makes you feel, and nor from the loss of the liberation gained from discovery and from the exploration of ideas. Those who would be willing to impede that highly valuable quality, they're also highly likely to be less appreciative of the full range of benefits of these qualities, which means there's a much higher probability that they're not making good decisions about our free speech. Free speech is inextricably linked to thinking and to the conversations in our head and the conversations we have with others. And we are making a massive mistake in the extent to which we're suppressing this and retarding this. And again, it's still a thin end of the wedge. It's still the early days, but we should do everything we can to fight this, because it's the people that you think are on your side in championing a suppression of speech that you happen to like. Well, they'll soon come after you for something you really do value at some point. If we allow this to happen further and further and more, it's going to be so tough, even more than you can imagine. So again, like the first example, I don't know how to solve it really. I'm just inviting clarity on what I think are the problems, and I think the way we're going to reverse this trend is just by speaking courageously and openly, and not enough of us doing that and not putting up with it should at least give people pause for thought. Because you got to remember, people are being brought up like climate alarmism as well. People have been brought up in this environment from a young age, and they don't know any different really. This is what they are beholden to with the culture that they've been born into. And this leads me nicely on to number 3, which was the whole biological sex and gender issue. What I think about this. You've seen. If you're not, you can read my blog links down below. It's a systematic attempt in society for a complete carving up of the proper biological distinctions between male and female. It's a movement that's led to a wave of utter confusion amongst our young people. It's removal of breasts and penises and testes, in what they call gender affirming surgery. I mean, identity is complex enough as it is when you're young, let alone getting people to have this sort of stuff normalized. And inventing bogus gender terms that have no basis in reality. And we have, the rest of us being pressurized into accepting these as empirically valid and threatened with court proceedings or losing our job if we don't. The reality is, gender has always really been an extraneous term with no rigorous basis in empirical reality. If you can explain an aspect of the personality without gender, which you can, then you can tell that there's no real need for the term gender at all. It's always been the case. It's just that we've never really needed to say much about it in the past, because almost nobody was inventing so many bogus alternatives and trying to distort the nature of biology. Identity is complex again with masculinity, with femininity. Of course it is, and in some cases, there are sexual expressions in the sex organs that depart from the norm. But this stuff is so damaging, the way it's become a mass wave of hysteria, and of course the biggest victims in this are women, really, and children. I mean, everyone's a victim to some extent, but women's sex is under threat in a sense, and children for whom this is having such a devastating effect, this is just the start. You only have to think about some of the more extreme things that are happening, the corrective surgery at such a young age, so-called corrective surgery. And I mean, don't you think it's alarming that men identifying as women are being allowed to serve time in women's prisons, causing all sorts of problems for women? Men freely encouraged to use women's toilets if they feel that's their identity, when clearly biologically they are male. Adult males, as we keep seeing in the headlines, can have the audacity and the narcissism to want to compete in female sports, women's sports, as females, even though they're males, and stand there and on the podium and beat them in strength and stamina and physical dexterity. Often, this is absurd, and we can do better. Surely we can do better than this, And again, young people have just been brought up in the world but this is totally normalized. I've got every sympathy with people who are struggling with gender dysphoria and this sort of stuff. But as is so often the case, what happens is the political and media self-interest groups get a hold of this, and it just becomes an absolute catastrophe. And that is what's happening. And it's so dangerous. It's so alarming. And again, how we stop it's going to be a big battle. But it just involves kindness and compassion, but speaking out truthfully against some of this stuff, particularly to our young people, because we are doing so much damage to them. We really are. The fourth one, was it the fourth one? Am I on the fourth one? Yeah, I think it's political overinflation, banks, politicians flooding the economy with more money supply, and combined with the increased size of the state and state spending. I mean, this is obviously a very complex one too, but part of the short-termism is in vastly increasing the money supply, as I said, to pay for things that will help them stay in power. That's really the primary agenda, because politicians have to be short-term to some extent. When politicians increase the money supply and the credit supply, purchasing power, of course, goes all out of whack with the market supply and demand signals, which are there's never been a more reliable information signal than the price system for determining the right allocation of resources, the right prices to provide those resources. And it's just hurting most of the citizens in this country. This is mostly why the house prices have continued to rise faster than real wages, as we all know. But the government and the banks, they usually benefit from an inflated money and credit supply, of course, but most other people feel the cost. It's a very, in some cases, thinly spread cost, but they don't really realize, because of that, why they are feeling the cost. All this new money, it hasn't created any significantly any more value, and certainly it hasn't created any more material resources from which to consume. It means that there's more money going to consumers, which are competing for the same resources that were always there. Which means that, combined with the higher taxes to pay for it, our goods cost more for the consumer, like you and me. As I said recently in a blog post, if you just have to imagine an economically distinct, isolated system. If X is the money supply and if Y is the supply of goods, then if X is artificially increased, then the prices in the set Y are going to go up. And this is very much avoidable. We've seen in the news recently, haven't we? They've now got to raise interest rates, and the area of cheap money is possibly over, at least for a time. We're reverting historically back to the normal rates of interest, which is sort of 5, 6, 7%, which is an inevitability. And this will cause enormous pain for those who've borrowed at an artificially low rate of interest to buy their houses. We need interest rates actually to return to the level that reflects the price of borrowing, not so much to correct inflation, although that is important too, and that is starting to happen slowly, but to undo the gross mispricing of risk that we've seen over the last 30, 40 years, to correct the massive overinflation of assets that the increasingly ludicrous monetary supply, at least since the Blair years, has led to. And then we are going to have a crash in house prices. I'm almost certain that it's got to happen, really. When it will happen quite, I don't know. Maybe, what do we know, 24th of July, middle of 2023, maybe 2025. I don't know, maybe 18 months' time. But property prices are going to have to go down. The Bank of England have tightened the money supply. In recent months, there hasn't been any huge growth in the money supply, I think, for the last 5, 6 months, from what I read. But 80% of all money now is credit, of course, created by commercial banks. But although a decline in inflation is on the way, you have to remember as well, there'll be an inevitable lag between when that money supply feeds through into our consumer activity. Again, those lags normally last. They normally take up to a year, up to 2 years sometimes, but depending on the conditions under which they occurred. And this is because, in terms of economics, inflation is what's called sticky. In terms of they're called sticky prices in economics. Whereby prices for goods and services rise in response to a money supply increase with a short lag, or sometimes other causes too, changes in supply or changes in demand. But because of this lag, it tends to take longer for labor prices, that's wages, to adjust. So at the moment, the wage increases, which we will see when this lag is over and it's sort of filtrated through. But they're running behind inflation at the moment, which is why we're getting lots of strikes and lots of discontent in the workplace. It will catch up. I think you'll have to see prices of labouring rise to match these levels of inflation, but it'll take some time. But yeah, see it as a warning. The era of cheap mortgages and cheap interest rates, low interest rates, they're over for a time, and they probably won't come back to what they have been for some time, if ever. You're going to expect to see mortgages around the 5-6% mark, I think, which is historically pretty normal. But as I said, it's not a bad thing. It's the natural rate of interest reflects the price of borrowing. It's not an unreasonable price. It just wouldn't be so painful if house prices were more in line with the kind of inflationary measures of other goods and services we've seen, where the long-term, the ratio of house prices to earnings was much narrower than it is. Again, I've got blogs on this on my housing tab. You can read all about that in more detail if you want. But It's going to be painful. There'll be lots of people in negative equity because of this, and there'll be lots of, sadly, people will probably be repossessed, and they're going to have some difficult times. There's no question about that. But yeah, all this really is just, it's part of the big burden of having such a sizable state, and a state that just wants to grow. I mean, I won't say too much more because it could go on forever about the size of the state, and it. I mean, the national debt, what, 5,000-6,000 pounds a second? I think it's going up. Last time I checked, you can check this on the national debt calculator. You know, this is an absurd burden on mostly future generations, your children and grandchildren, but it's spiraling so far out of control, and you get diseconomies of scale when the state gets so big, and it's managing so many things at so many complex levels. It's, again, the only way to stop it really is to not put up with this stuff, but it's complex because largely the population seems to want this stuff, and they seem to encourage it, and the politicians lap that up, and they respond, and they give the it's a negative circularity, like a almost like a toxic codependency. The public want this, and the politicians are primed to give them what they think they want, and then they want even more of it. But you're seeing all of the problems already with having an overinflated state. It's not equipped to deal with this stuff and the levels of complexity, especially as it doesn't adhere to the most efficient form of managing an economy, which is the price system. It so rarely pays enough regard to the price system and the information signals of supply and demand, and it's all been skewed out of whack. It's difficult. The last thing on my list was the infantilizing of our youth, wasn't it? You know, and this is of course linked to the ever increasing size of the state and its overprotective nature, and also playing out in the restrictions on free speech that we mentioned earlier, and restrictions on our thinking. You know, we all know about the Freudian devouring mother in psychoanalytic theory, the mother that's who's overprotected to the point where it becomes a huge impediment to the child's development. The public encourage and invite the state to operate in loco parentis. We seem to be a society that loves to delegate this stuff to the establishment and give the politicians more and more power. And that's what we're seeing on a mass scale, particularly in our young people. Again, they've been brought up for this to be normalized. It's a pernicious combination of being overprotective and overprotected and remaining infants in mindset. It's a perverse sense of entitlement they have, while at the same time, which of course makes them hugely out of whack with the reality of life around them, and especially in terms of what we humans are required to do in terms of confronting our struggles and making complex trade-offs, and facing the challenges in life that help us to grow and become stronger. There's so much of that lacking in particularly the young people, because they've been brought up in this world where they've been locked in gilded cages and been encouraged to bolt the door shut from the inside, and that's what's feeding into our society, and it'll get, as I said, it'll get worse and worse too. It's doing immeasurable damage already, for which we are going to pay a huge price, particularly our future generations. We are fostering a society where so many people they're just ill-equipped to deal with life adequately. There's just no, and you can see that when you look at how people respond to many of the things we've already talked about, and many of the things that have become huge in the political agenda. They just lack a proper sense of perspective. It's a society full of anxious young people, and a great many of them are not going to be able to be what they need to be in adulthood. And in many ways, the establishment have not just helped and the politicians and the media, they've not just helped create it. They've actively encouraged it because it makes people more malleable and more servile to their needs. And if you combine all of the above with the tragic breakdown of the family unit, the nucleus of the family unit, which is such an important part of society, and the increased top-down capacity, especially through technology, to infect the very pliable minds and assert even greater control over them in very subtle and creeping ways, you can then see even more clearly why it's a speeding train running out of control along the track into a kind of hellish dystopia. And I don't say all this lightly. I'm generally very optimistic about life. I'm a realist. I think in so many ways this is the best society that's ever been created. And I love Britain. I love the historical, the Enlightenment values, the Renaissance cultures of Europe, the classic antiquity of the great literature. It's a beautiful country, and humans have never been better off in terms of material progression, thanks to capitalism and science and freedom of expression of ideas and ability to compete and to trade. We are in a great place in so many ways, admittedly, but these are 5 of the worst and most damaging things we are doing. I'm sure there are more. I could probably come up with 5 to 10 more, maybe, and maybe I will in another video. But yeah, these are the 5 that really are on my mind at the moment, because I just wanted to articulate them because they're on my radar. There's a line from Nietzsche. He asked about what it means to live philosophically, and he says it's about extricating oneself cleverly from an ugly game. And I think, I'm not offering too many solutions now about how we do it, but we need to work together. We need to speak courageously and truthfully. We need to be prepared to fight for the truth and for facts and for things that we know are empirically grounded and things that have contributed to our knowledge and our wisdom and made us the society we are. So yeah, thank you for listening. And I hope, while it probably may not be that encouraging, I hope it's enlightening, and I hope it's something that you can think about. And if you agree and if you think it's useful, then please do share. There's a link below to my blog, and in the comment in the description, I have many articles, 750 articles on many subjects, from big questions to political discussions to small everyday things. It's a diverse blog with lots of interesting stuff. So if you like it, please do subscribe and have a look and read more. And I hope this has been useful, and thank you very much for listening. Good night.